We are, I think, officially like 15 minutes behind schedule, so I'm afraid we're going to have to go straight into our part two, which is sort of celebrating Tyler, which is a continuation of a lot of the ideas that you brought up for us. This is turnover to both, well, I'll say a few words, and then we'll have the Mission Prize folks sort of step up to be celebrated, led by Emily Marker. So we can maybe discuss a little bit what the Mission Prize is while we start to move forward. So I should say that despite the pandemic, this has been a wonderful few years for the Western. A society filled with energy because of its members and the officers who serve it. We are strong, we're innovative and nimble because of your dedication to the Western spirit of hospitality, mentorship, service, and engagement. The Mission Prize was created to recognize that spirit and the time it takes to maintain that kind of spirit, which often goes unnoticed, unrewarded, unremunerated, and unacknowledged by too many of the institutions at which both the academics and people beyond academia in this room work. It's also been a rough year for a lot of the people in this room, and I do want to acknowledge that. I want to start, although this is really about Tyler, by also acknowledging John Merriman. He was my advisor, but that's not the only reason I'm acknowledging him. I'm also acknowledging him because back in 1974, I believe apparently the revolt started in 1973, according to a conversation we had earlier, he was one of those breakaway historians who decided there needed to be another way to talk about history, and it needed to not be about the East Coast elitist kinds of institutions, although he ended up working at one. He was not yet at one. He was at Michigan. He had grown up on the West Coast, and it was also, of course, West in the sense of left in terms of politics, and he has been a supporter and an attendee of this conference ever since. Almost exactly 1 year ago, the Western unexpectedly found itself also mourning one of its former presidents, Tyler Stovall, the first African-American president of the society. The second one, who is now the past president right now, is sitting in this room, so Christy Picicro back there. And I'm apologizing because I may get a bit emotional while I'm speaking right now. Many of us still mourn him, Tyler. Many of us still mourn John Merriman, whose burial I attended last May. They had in common that they were these diehard champions of the Western and powerful mentors to many of its members. And in Tyler's case, I was also one of those mentees. Some of us, myself included, had actually nominated Tyler for the inaugural Mission Prize. And many more of us, when we heard the news, immediately pivoted to recommend that we name the prize after him instead. And our at-the-time president, Christy Picicro, immediately brought it to a vote that passed the governing council unanimously. Thank you, Christy. This was because, as many of you know, a crucial part of the Western's mission is to help foster an educational community that is actively committed to achieving equity and inclusion in the production and transmission of knowledge about the Francophone world. We saw a lot of that in the talk today. Thank you again for that. And to that end, the Tyler Stovall Western Society for French History Mission Prize recognizes teachers and scholars who are doing outstanding work to combat inequalities in the field of French and Francophone history, in the profession, in their home institutions, and beyond. By celebrating individuals who are developing tools and practices that challenge inequity, oppression, and discrimination, not only through research, but also through teaching, mentoring, and professional leadership, the Tyler Stovall WSFH Mission Prize proudly signals the Western's belief that such work is an essential part of what it means to be an exemplary citizen, scholar, and educator. So as I mentioned, Tyler was a mentor to me. I was a grad student presenting my first paper ever. I wish I could say it was at the Western, but it was that other society, the French Colonial, which is also pretty cool. So we have a president here that represents it for us. And when I'd finished giving my paper, a distinguished gentleman came up to me at the end with a warm smile, asking whether my paper was linked to a book or a dissertation, even though I looked awfully young. It was unlikely to be a book. But he didn't assume things of people, right? And then he said he'd love to read the dissertation. So I had no idea who he was because he wasn't wearing his badge until he gave his plenary talk that evening. And I thought, oh wow, he's a giant in my field. And I didn't give him my dissertation because I decided it was not good enough yet to be read by a giant in my field. A couple of years later, I had my first tenure track job, and with 2 colleagues, I taught a Black Paris course, and I invited Tyler. His response, I'd love to come, but in exchange, will you finally send me your dissertation? Which I did. He read it on the plane. He told me later he did this a lot on planes. He's read many dissertations on a plane. And asked if I had time for coffee while he was in town. Of course I did, in my case tea though. And he proposed that we co-edit a volume together. And I was a second-year professor in a tenure-track position. This was huge, right? Not a year went by after that we weren't connecting in person, over the phone, via email, working on various projects together, but also just meeting up to chat, to laugh, to hear stories of his son Justin, to eat really good food. I'm sharing this story not because it's mine, actually, but because after his death, so many people came up to share some version of that very same story with me. I'm sharing that story because it's our story of Tyler Stovall as French historians. He was to me what he was to so many: generous, egalitarian, humble, a mentor, a cheerleader, and very funny and surprisingly relatable, despite being a dean, as I said, a giant in our field, and a just plain brilliant writer. Like many here, I miss all of that in him. I miss more than anything, however, his friendship. The day he called me friend was a pretty phenomenal day. Because that's the other thing, he was unassuming enough to be a friend to many of his former students. I'm looking at one right now. And also to many of his mentees. All of this and more is the reason the Mission Prize is now the Tyler Stovall Western Society for French History Mission Prize. So in that Mission Prize spirit, it's also important to name the people who served on the committee that selected this year's inaugural winners so that they go recognized for doing the very kind of work the prize honors. They had to invent a way to evaluate the unseen and unpaid labor that many of our institutions have yet to figure out, or perhaps don't want to figure out how to recognize. This year's fabulous inaugural committee, Mission Prize Committee, was made up of Liz Everton, Chris Church, Patrick Luis Sullivan de Oliveira, Judith de Groot, and Ian Collar, under the excellent leadership of Emily Marker, who, as I said, is our next vice president. Thank you very much to that committee. Merci. The Mission Prize also exists because of the DEI committee back from in 2016 and 17, chaired by Christy Pekikaro, and with actually many presidents and former presidents on it, because Robin Waltz was there, Emily Marker was there, I was there, Andrew Ross was there. Am I forgetting anyone? No, I think that was our committee. And one of the things we did was rewrite the Mission Prize in the spirit that then became, rewrite the mission statement of the Western Society for French History, first written in 1974, in the spirit that then sort of led to the Mission Prize. So finally, I announced this year's winners a couple of weeks ago to Denise Hurd, who's Tyler's wife. She wrote back to congratulate all 3 of them, and also said this, and I'm quoting her. Hopefully I'm going to get through this. I'm glad that Tyler's legacy is living on through his community of scholars and collaborators. It's a wonderful tribute, and I know he would be so honored and proud to have this prize in his name. So with that pride in mind, Emily Marker, I'm going to give you the floor, and I'm announcing formally to everyone this year's Mission Prize winners, Nimisha Barton, Abdellali Hajjat, and Sylvie Kande. The floor is all of yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. I'm so honored to be here today to present to you the inaugural cohort of the Tyler Stovall Western Society for French History Mission Prize winners. Before I introduce them and invite each of them up here to say a few words, I'd like to echo Jennifer's thanks to the amazing team, Chris, Ian, Judith, Liz, and Patrick, and I'd also like to thank my colleagues on the exploratory committee that helped develop the rationale and process for the prize back in 2018, Chris, Judith Miller, and also Christy Picicaro. So Chris has really been with us every step of the way on this, and I'm so pleased to announce that he will be taking the helm for the next prize cycle as chair of the committee. So thank you so much, Chris, for taking this on. I'll say a couple of words, but I'll probably skip some of them since Jennifer covered everything really well. But I've been really thrilled to have been a part of the Western's concerted effort over the past several years to center equity, empowerment, and anti-oppression as key planks of the Society's mission. When we rewrote the mission statement back in 2017, we were determined to do something more than just ticking off a box of the diversity checklist. We wanted to get beyond the DEI industrial complex's toothless calls for diversity's sake, and platitudes about cultural representation. Instead, we saw the amplified mission as an active framework that could empower the Western's membership to envision and pursue a different kind of diversity work that would not be about virtue signaling, but rather would be keenly attuned to questions of power, structures of inequality, and how to enact meaningful transformation, not just at our annual meetings, but within the Academy more broadly. As an independent professional organization, we occupy a key strategic position. Unconstrained by recalcitrant administrations and bureaucratic inertia, we have the potential to chart our own path and effect more rapid and long-lasting cultural and institutional change in the field of French and Francophone history and beyond. The creation of this new major prize, as well as the Engagé program in less than 5 years during a global pandemic, is a powerful illustration of what we can achieve together. So the prize, as Jennifer said, recognizes teachers and scholars doing outstanding work to combat structural inequalities in the field of French history, the profession, and their home institutions, and beyond the Academy. I had some language that was very similar to what Jennifer said, so I'm going to just skip ahead to that and think about a few more things that the prize is trying to achieve. As the prize carries a substantial cash award, the Western is also modeling to other societies and other institutions what it looks like for an organization like ours to put its money where its values are, which I think is all the more necessary in our age of proliferating meaningless statements that go nowhere. And most importantly, the prize gives us an opportunity not just to applaud our colleagues' creative, innovative, and impactful work, but also to learn from them and to help us identify new strategies, tools, and initiatives that we can collaborate on within the Western and also bring back to our home institutions and other communities. So it is in that spirit that I will now briefly introduce our prize winners and highlight some of their signal achievements that we were so impressed by, and also ask them to come up here and share some of their ideas about the kinds of change they most want to see in the profession moving forward. And I will just say, while they have about 5 minutes each today, we are going to continue this conversation, hopefully, in further roundtables and discussions, probably in Detroit and beyond. So I'm going to introduce all of them, and then I'll just ask them to come up in the order in which I've introduced them, which is alphabetical. Nimisha Barton is a visiting scholar at UC Irvine and an equity and inclusion consultant in education. Her award-winning Reproductive Citizens, Gender, the State, and Immigration in France, 1880 to 1945, appeared in 2020 with Cornell University Press, and she is currently finalizing her second book manuscript, Just Future, A Guide to Social Justice in Higher Education, under contract with Cornell. She completed her PhD in history at Princeton in 2014 and a dual BA in history and religious studies at UC Berkeley in 2006. So we were so impressed by all of the myriad things that Nimisha has been doing, but I'll signal a couple of things. She developed the first 4-year scholar program for first-generation students at an Ivy League institution. Now, as an equity consultant and more public-facing writer, she's really someone who's moving the conversation, and not just the conversation, but giving concrete tools and practices, moving all of those things forward. We were stunned by the powerful student testimonies she had collected and shared with us, how her syllabi conveyed such deep thought, care, and attention to questions of equity and inclusion, thought-provoking blog posts and powerful testimonials from the community on their impact, and also the important work she has been doing with the Modern European History Collective. Abdellali Hajjat is Associate Professor of Sociology at the Universite Libre de Bruxelles since 2019. He is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Marinage, Race and Social Sciences. His books include Islamophobia in France, How the Elites Forged the Muslim Problem, which will be coming out with Georgia in 2023 with Marwan Mohammed, The Wretched of France, the 1983 March for Equality and Against Racism, which came out this year with Indiana, and Les Frontières de l'Identité Nationale, l'Injonction à l'Assimilation en France métropolitaine et coloniale, which came out with La Découverte in 2012. His research focuses on citizenship and race in French law, mobilizations by post-colonial immigrants in France and working-class neighborhoods, Islamophobia and the redefinition of French secularism, hate crimes in the criminal justice system, and post-colonial controversies in Belgium. He really is a pioneer in getting critical race theory, Islamophobia, race, colonialism, and much more integrated into the curriculum first in France and now in Belgian higher education. He has been sort of path-breaking with his institution building with regard to research networks and seminars and really connecting the people in these Francophone continental spaces that are willing and interested in doing this work, which is, as many of you know, an intense uphill battle. And the significant policy impact of research projects that he's working on now on statistics in French higher education. All of this is really just like profoundly transformational, and we're so excited to celebrate that work today. Finally, we have Sylvie Kande, a Franco-Senegalese historian who teaches African studies at SUNY Old Westbury. In addition to her fascinating scholarship on West Africa, she has authored 3 collections of poetry with Gallimard. Lagon, Lagune, Tableau de Mémoire, came out in 2000, was postfaced by Edouard Glissant. Her prize-winning La Quête infinie de l'autre vivre, Épopée en 3 chants from 2011 has been translated into both English and German. And another prize-winning collection, Gestuelle, in 2016 will be anthologized in German as well. Sorry, another prize-winning collection. She is a member of the honorary committee of the World Foundation for the Mémorial Gorée Almadis and preservation of Gorée Island, and the historian advisor for the restoration of the public archives in Sierra Leone. Sylvie's work is just so remarkable for the breadth of the contributions, from poetry volumes to sending school supplies, books, and helping raise money to communities in West Africa. Her current project on memorializing slavery in Senegal and Sierra Leone is so exciting and a really critical bridge between Francophone and Anglophone Africa. And her outstanding work to promote knowledge of Africa and the diaspora in France, the US, and beyond really stunned the committee. So we are just so thrilled to invite each of you to come up here and share a couple of your thoughts about where we really need to go, right, moving forward. And I hope that we will continue talking about and developing those thoughts over cocktails in the reception right after. So if I could have Nimisha come up first, please.
I sat at the back of the room so that the applause would last as long as possible. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, committee. Thank you, everyone in this room, for not having left yet. I am just very thankful, and I just want to say that I'm very glad that there is a professional organization out there that chooses to recognize this work because it is very uncommon that professional organizations in academia would, and it's very exciting that I get to belong to this organization too. So let me just say, as sort of a personal aside, that the truth is, if these sorts of conversations were happening 10 years ago, if these sorts of spaces were available 10 years ago, I could see my life having turned out quite differently. Not better, just differently. So I just want to encourage any graduate students, if you're out there, please do just suck the marrow out of this organization. They have mentorship programs, which just, those never existed. Mentorship programs, different kinds of events where you can really learn all this invisible, this hidden curriculum about what it means to be an academic, or what it takes, how you get to where you want to go. So please take advantage of everything that's available. So Emily invited us to share our hopes and dreams for the field, and then she very rudely told us we had 3 minutes. But that's your bad, because you put me in front of a microphone. So I guess what I'd like to do is just talk for a moment about what's happening already at the level of pedagogy, because I'd like to use that to think about larger paradigm shifts that I want to see happening, not just in the classroom and not even just in history or academia, but sort of more largely in the world. So, you know, there's so much great stuff happening. A lot of you are at the forefront of everything that's happening. That's so incredible right now. So much of it is happening under the banner of inclusive teaching, right? So I just want to see more of it in the history classroom. Clearer, better syllabi, syllabi that include more scholars of color, fewer lectures and less content dumping, and more facilitated discussions and flipped classrooms, interactive activities that promote peer learning, all that good stuff. A shift towards growth mindset, where we understand that the brain is a muscle like any other, and it grows over time. I just love that we're moving away from this sage on the stage model towards this new model of faculty as facilitators of learning. I think that's fantastic. I also think that, you know, these are all the things that make classrooms inclusive for first-generation students, for students from lower income backgrounds, for students of color. It also neutralizes, to some extent, ableism in the classroom and so many other isms that, of course, show up in our classrooms, and they foster student success. And so all I want to do is just add one little thing. So right now in the zeitgeist, for a lot of different reasons, we have begun to talk about the necessity for educators, for faculty, for academics in general to develop cultural competence, right? That may not always be what we call it, but that's sort of why you're going to all these equity trainings, I would imagine, right, or being asked to go to them. And I'm not opposed to that, but I was invited to dream big for just a second, so if you'll entertain me, I would love to suggest that we move away from a model where we are trying to get at cultural competence, and instead towards one that gets us closer to cultural humility. And that's not my invention. This is something that came out of the field of public health in the late 1990s. It was an idea developed by 2 women of color, and it was designed to address the fact that medical professionals were failing to offer the same level of care to all of their patients, and that cultural competency so-called trainings were contributing to this disaster, because, you know, we would go, you know, I'm a doctor, I go to the training, I know this stuff, I am culturally competent, the end, right? And this is how they defined it. Let's use our critical thinking hats for a moment. An easily demonstrable mastery of a finite body of knowledge and endpoint evidence largely by comparative and quantitative assessments. So it's really hard for me not to notice that this bears some similarity to how we are all taught in graduate school to become professionals, to become academics, right? That we are to be masters of knowledge, right? That we are to have absolute content expertise, right? So to some extent, cultural competency, the idea of is so appealing to us because it jives 100% with our own training and the way that training is presented to us, right? Instead, they recommend cultural humility. That is really decentering this idea of mastery, right? Not just wanting mastery, but also the idea that mastery is possible and thus even a worthwhile goal. And they define it as a, quote, commitment and active engagement in lifelong process that individuals enter into on an ongoing basis for them with patients, communities, colleagues, and themselves. So I just want to take maybe 30 seconds and invite us on a fanciful little experiment called, what would that look like in higher education? So I think of classroom settings that would cultivate a sense of curiosity among our students, between students and ourselves. We'd find ways to build trust among our students so that, you know, when they're in doubt about what a peer of theirs has said, they learn to ask questions, they learn to get curious, right? That we create conditions for really challenging conversations, because if we can do that, then we're helping people stay in the room during hard, uncomfortable, and unpleasant conversations. And I think this is important because unfortunately right now the world does not offer us many models of that kind of humility. So I wonder what it would be like if we could be the models for that for our students, right? Show them what it looks like to be someone who has that emotional maturity such that when they are confronted with difficult moments, they can rise to the occasion in a particular way, not drawing on their mastery, but drawing on their humility, the stance of not knowing, the radical stance of not knowing, I guess, right? What does it look like to be someone who's willing to pause, who's willing to reflect, who's willing to reconsider the way that they think of something, who'll say things as simple as, I never thought of that. Or, that's a really tough question. Let me get back to you on that. Or dare I say, I don't think that came out the way that I wanted it to. Let me think on it a little bit and get back to you tomorrow, right? At the end of the day, I just want our field and society more generally to move towards a paradigm in which not knowing something is also not something to be afraid of. So instead, we would see it as an invitation to learn something that you didn't know before. And I know I'm talking all hearts and minds here, but I think it's interesting because it provides a pathway to something a lot bigger, I think. Questions like, what systems prevented me from learning this, that, or the other thing in the first place, right? What can I do to change that? Not just in the classroom and not even maybe just in our home institutions, but how do we bring that paradigm of humility with us outside of the classroom? How are we going to use our power and our elite positions? Because we all sitting in this room have elite privilege at this point. How are we going to use those privileges to change systems, to change structures? Because sometimes these systems and these structures, they seem to have been willfully constructed to leave us in the dark about people who aren't us and places that aren't ours, whoever us and ours may be, right? And I think that with this pedagogy of humility, this paradigm of cultural humility, we could think to ourselves, of course this would require curiosity, but it would also really require a lot of courage, because it would be asking you to look inside yourself, and you may not always like what you find. I know I haven't. I don't always like what I find in there, but that's why it's so important to look for it. So that's my humble wish for the field of French and Francophone studies.
Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. So I'm going to speak in French because I'm quite tired, and I just have 3 or 5 minutes, so it will be quicker if I speak in French. Tout d'abord, j'aimerais remercier la société et le comité pour ce prix. J'avoue avoir été étonné d'avoir reçu ce mail, parce que je suis sociologue. Donc, vous avez transgressé la frontière disciplinaire en donnant ce prix à un sociologue. Et je suis d'autant plus heureux que si je ne connaissais pas Tyler Stovall personnellement, Je l'ai rencontré ponctuellement à Paris dans des colloques. Jennifer, mais aussi Jennifer Boitin, Sylvie Larcher, Audrey Célestine m'ont beaucoup parlé de lui. Et bien sûr, je connaissais son travail, notamment sur les banlieues rouges, donc le bouquin sur la Roadbed, et puis sur les Africains américains à Paris. Et ça a été une source d'inspiration pour mon propre travail. Donc voilà, recevoir ce prix avec le nom de Taylor Stovall m'aime beaucoup. Et je suis très touché par cet honneur qui m'est fait. Et donc maintenant, il me reste 2 minutes. Donc pour parler de comment changer l'université. Bon. Je pense que, en résumé, ce qui, moi, m'intéresse dans le travail que je fais à l'université, c'est de tendre vers ce qu'on pourrait appeler une démocratie universitaire ou une démocratie académique. Parce que je considère que l'université, l'enseignement supérieur doit être considéré comme un bien commun, qu'il ne doit pas être réservé aux happy few, aux classes sociales supérieures, aux hommes, aux personnes blanches, mais que ce soit un espace qui soit véritablement démocratique dans le sens de représentation de la population d'un pays donné. Et de ce point de vue-là, même si je viens de France, je connais un tout petit peu le système éducatif états-unien. Il y a des enjeux qui sont similaires, même s'il y a des histoires qui sont très différentes. Et il me semble qu'il y a des pistes à suivre en termes pour atteindre cet objectif de démocratie universitaire. Et j'aimerais souligner simplement un point, c'est le fait de ne pas se contenter des miettes. Parce que souvent, les programmes d'inclusion, les programmes de promotion de l'égalité, les programmes qui visent à lutter contre les discriminations sont basés, en tout cas pour le contexte français que je connais bien, dans le cadre institutionnel et budgétaire existant. Et donc, on se bat pour des miettes. Or, il me semble que le nerf de la guerre, c'est l'argent. Le nerf de la guerre, c'est le budget. Et il me semble, sauf si vous allez me contredire, il n'existe pas d'université où la communauté universitaire, dans toutes ses composantes, les académiques, mais aussi les personnels administratifs et les étudiants, contrôlent majoritairement le budget de leur université. Donc ce qu'on pense être le cœur de la démocratie, donc le contrôle du budget, donc ce qu'on applique, voilà, les démocraties parlementaires, vous êtes mieux passés que moi, vous êtes des historiens, sont nées dans cette contestation par rapport au budget. On ne l'applique pas pour l'université. On a cette impensée selon lequel le budget, c'est quelque chose sur lequel on n'a pas de maîtrise et qui doit rester en fait entre les mains de ceux qui détiennent vraiment les rênes de l'université. Donc si il y a une chose à faire pour tendre vers cette démocratie universitaire, c'est invoquer une sorte de nouveau mai 68 universitaire, où il y a une véritable remise en cause des formes de hiérarchisation qui existent dans l'université et que les hiérarchies soient remises en cause, que la sélection dans l'université soit aussi questionnée et que ce soit un véritable bien commun et pas réservé aux puissants. Voilà, merci.
Can you hear me? Yes. I wish I could find the words to truly convey all my gratitude to the Western Society for French History, the committee, all my joy also as a recipient of the inaugural Taylor Stovall Mission Prize. I accept it as a sign of recognition of things that I have done to feel a need I saw, or to propose a look at things in another transcultural, transdisciplinary perspective. But I accept it mostly as an invitation to take care of things that remain to be done or could be done better on the longue durée or in specific times and in specific places. I've long admired Tyler Stovall for looking at the flow of social things, creating concepts and applying theory to a reality I know quite well as a person of African and French descent, whatever that means, born in France when the French Empire collapsed. Today, I'm all the more indebted to this eminent colleague we all miss and want to emulate. And since I was tasked with briefly addressing the possible direction the field could take in the near future, I would propose a new politic, a new poetics of citation. This simple proposition hides an array of fertile possibilities. It seems to me, for instance, that multiplying the conversations we have with other voices that operate in other languages with a radically different sense of temporality, thus periodization and causality, another sense of temporality than many historians, professional historians have, is essential to the effort of going beyond the colonial epistemologies we struggle with. And I'm thinking, for instance, of the interest of the work on oral culture, orality done in African history in the 60s, for instance, all the impact that this methodology had, on the field of history and beyond. Changing the way we cite is also disrupting the hierarchies that operate in academia and scholarship. It is an essential part of the reflection on our individual and collective relation to the power to represent. A rethinking of citation would lead to a richer understanding of our diverse, though yet unequal, historical and discursive agency. Thank you again.
Thank you all for sharing those really generative thoughts, and I hope that we can all continue thinking, chewing them over a drink. I will just say that I hope that, just these brief introductions and these brief comments give you a sense of really the breadth of the kind of work that we're hoping to celebrate and recognize with this prize. We just reopened the nomination for this coming prize cycle, so hope it gives you some ideas about folks that you know who, really are doing this work and deserve recognition and recompense that they have not been getting up until now. So thank you, everybody, and let's go have a drink to the reception.